Well, there we go. We've arrived at 6:30. It is a little foggy outside, so I think a few people will be a little later as they're driving slower in the thick, thick fog of spring. But otherwise, we'll get it going. We have a lot of fun things to review. It was generally a positive year for 2 years in a row on almost all fronts. That not being withstanding the world's a challenging place, and it's all relative. It's all relative. Indeed. But we have an agenda over there just to give you the quick highlights before we start to get into it, and I'll give you a little review of some highlights. What do we got? In the background, the escarpment. We'll talk about the integrity status a bit of the Rock Chapel Forest area, which runs along the face of the escarpment. We have quite a few kilometers of escarpment at the Royal Botanical Gardens. We picked up, this is the low point, the theme of invasive species is a forever challenge. Your things switching continents and doesn't work out so well. A little unbalanced. One of our favorite trees, many people's favorite tree, the eastern hemlock. It's been an adventure in the US for a while. Now it's beginning here. Beyond that, we've had quite a run of paying real close attention to the turtles and where they go and how many nest and keeping them safe. We've got quite a story to tell on that one at this point. It's really added up. And the topic that really inspires the passion, endangered species, species at risk. We have a lot of volunteers engaged on a lot of species at risk, to say the least. So we'll hear a little bit about that because it's a big world. And then we'll have a break. Then we'll come back, talk about the marsh. Whether it's worse or better, it's better. 2 steps forward, 3 steps forwards, 2 steps back, as always. Net gain, fish, things alive in the marsh. What's doing with them? And then Lindsay, who you may know as former terrestrial ecologist, now programs manager, will give us a little look forward into 2025, which should be a fun year and has started to melt. And it is spring. I know it's spring because yesterday on my evening outing to look at the marsh and the ice, heard my first red-winged blackbird, which is awesome. I thought he was a little bit of a fool to be here this early. And there you go. And then 5 minutes later, a flock of tundra swans flew over wondering where the open water was. So it's the beginning. And certainly the water's running now. The ice is still thick, though. Practical thing, something terrible happens, we have exits all around, exit signs beside us, and of course, important, bathrooms. Over by the stairs that you came up at the top, there are bathrooms, and down the stairs and under them, there are more bathrooms. Most important things in the end, especially if we drink a bunch of coffee. After that, let's just look at the land. This will be a little bit of a different land acknowledgement. Do you recognize this as North America? You should. But it's the version that someone from France getting secondhand information would draw. The first-hand information came from, of course, the First Nations people talking to some French visitors. I'm going to put the laser pointer on, but just to help you, the St. Lawrence River, New York down there, that's actually Lake Ontario. On this, it's called Lake St. Louis, and I will point out the map says New France, but of course, it's First Nations area, not New France, just some French visitors. This is actually Lake Erie, and there's no such thing as Lake Huron. That's probably Lake Nipissing, Ottawa River. They hear stories of a super nifty place called Lake Huron out there, but they've never been. That's Niagara Falls, so they've heard of it. They've actually seen it by this point. Champlain stood and looked at it, wrote it down. Well, people wrote it down for him. The fun thing on the map, well, one, we're about right there. Believe it or not, that's the Bruce Peninsula. Short walk on this map. The fun thing, you might be able to see it at the back, buildings and fields, cultivating various things, corn, beans, squash, plums, you take your pick. Quite a community going on, quite a community. This is the Hudson's River, for example, the Mohawk River. All sorts of labels that you can puzzle over. It's online if you really want to play with it. It's fun, just to get people's impressions of the world back in the time. The thing that strikes me, I have a slight engineer side too, aside from all the buildings and all the people everywhere. Some of them are a couple of stories, so there's some engineering talent back. In 1600, Now, land acknowledgement. When the French were arriving at that time, where we are was the land of the neutrals. They have many subgroup names. Adewandron is our local one, which meant the deer people if you translated it. There's some deer on the map right there. The Haudenosaunee, 6 nations, were over on this region and below Lake Erie. The neutrals were here. You have the Algonquin above the Ottawa River. You have the Huron over here. You have the Ojibwe all the way through here. The one you hear about by treaty, when you hear those words, Mississaugas of the credit. They are in this region, part of the Ojibwe. They like the credit in the future, trading place. They ultimately become this location's people, and there was a treaty, 1792. That treaty came about because of war between the U.S. and the British and the French. Independence. The U.S. won the day, thus those who felt they'd like to stick more on the British trade side. A lot of them said, we got to move. And so they came to southern Ontario, hence the treaty. It's basically a post-war treaty. We're all going to get along. Now, before that, though, the First Nations, after a lot of fighting to deal with trade and the British and the French and the Dutch, etc., had their own dish with one spoon agreement, which came about in the year, but let's say the year 1700. The Haudenosaunee did it before that, well before that, to work together. And then the French, with a little bit of British, and all the First Nations did a 1701 agreement, which said we're all going to get along and share the resources. So when you talk to First Nations, they tend to think of that one, not the 1792 treaty, which is a current practical one with the British, which became the Canadian government. So there's our land acknowledgement. In the end, we're all here to steward it together. Next. Give me a next. There we go. A reminder. That is the RBG property. RBG Center on the right. Big place, about 8 kilometers from one end to the other. Lots of holes in it, roads, etc. Things that we really tried to do for the natural areas, which are the bulk of the property and mostly in Hamilton, about 90% in Hamilton. The whole thing is about where the escarpment and the lake come together. So it's a migratory thing. It's a big lake. It makes lots of fish if things are working right. Birds go huge distances just stopping in here for a quick rest. Said tundra swans, for example. With a sordid history, especially on the water that flowed in for a good 200 years. At the same time, it's always been a super fun place to visit, lots of points to look off, lots of water to enjoy, lots of things to see. So mix it in somehow, keep everybody getting along. And of course, being the southern part of Canada, a few rare things to say the least. There we go. This all started, of course, with a once lovely marsh that became the one on the left side. Brown mud hole with ditches through it. It's come a long way. It's got a long way to go. It's part of the 42 areas of the Great Lakes that were just so bad that there had to be an agreement to change it. It really means places that people lived longer with industrial activity. It's come a long way. It's got a long way to go. Highlights, things that everybody helped with. This was one of the bigger deals that started the year. 2 kilometers of serious wildlife barrier down Coots Drive at the back of Coots Paradise. Basically, that road's been there since the 30s, 1930s, 1930s. A lot of things were squished. A lot less things are getting squished. Maybe we might look for some volunteers because the snow load on it may have bent pieces. We'll see. Shortly, we'll know. The best part of the year, which ties to a little rough period after it. This is just a view of the marsh on a bench down below the nature center via the Arboretum. You could actually sit there and go, that is a marsh. How about that? I know people have been working at this one since the 1940s and 50s. Many of them no longer alive. They would shed a tear if they saw that picture. I almost do, because I've been going at it since 1994. I took that picture sitting on that bench. That was the low part of the year. Super heavy rainstorms. They could be much heavier. One of the creeks, Shadoke on the left, that's just one of the smaller creeks tearing through down to Coots Paradise. kind of made a mess out of our lovely water. At the same time, what we need to get to is a lot of rain gardens and infiltration features, and while that creek was blasting brown, I happened to stop by Churchill Park. Churchill Park's on the south side of Cootes Paradise. It went through a massive makeover. Started with water management, because really it was a slab of clay with a lake of water on it. And now it's quite diverse with water infiltration areas. The thing that I want to show you is a little video I took on the left. Well, first, on the right, there's a picture with pooled water on it, as it should be, and it's soaking in. And the water that flows out is coming through the little standpipe on the left. Here, I'll use my pointer. There's the little standpipe. Underground to get under the path. And if I press it, what you'll see is a lovely little clean water brook. If you don't get dizzy. And that's all we need upstream, everywhere. That's it. Simple, not simple. But in the midst of the brown, a makeover made clean. That was wonderful. Another fun one. We finally took the Hamilton Naturalist Club plaque that honored their massive anniversary back in 2017, 19, it's sort of in the dark there. 19, thank you. COVID years. And made a marvelous lookout at Princess Point. It's accessible, everything's right there, and fun spot to look out over the marsh, and the marsh is looking a little more marshy, so it's a little inspiring. If we got to the fall, a lot of invasive plants were removed, shrubs, like buckthorn and honeysuckle. Too many people now can only see honeysuckle, which is hard on your well-being when you realize how widespread it is in southern Ontario. The noteworthy thing, I think we crossed the 500,000 removed mark from the property, that's just this property, over, let's put it, the last 10, 12 years. Anyway, bunch of contributors to fuel the funds that make the work grow, notwithstanding the volunteer effort, which come from many a place. RPG volunteers, summer students, partner organizations, you name it. One last thing I did want to flag, because this caught me by surprise. There are thresholds in climate change, things that those who try to communicate it say, when we cross that one, some stuff's going to happen. We crossed the first one. It's called 1.5 degrees, warmer than before on average on this planet. Led me to the question, how warm is the planet on average? What used to be 15, now it's 16 and a half. This suddenly starts to make you think, it's going to be kind of hot sooner than later. We better start thinking about what's going to grow here, what's not going to grow here, a little more seriously. Anyway, in the middle, we're back to the agenda. That's our welcome